Okay, we're live.
Hi everyone.
Just gonna get in shot there.
Oh, here you go. Here's Tyler.
We're just gonna give it 30 seconds, guys, for everyone to join. But let us know how you're doing in the chat below.
Welcome everybody. Be interesting for some of you to put where you're from in the country.
Okay.
Okay, so are we ready? We're gonna go? Okay, welcome everybody to day one of the Property Development Bootcamp. Thank you very much for joining me this evening. So we're going to be running for probably 60 minutes, hour and a half this evening. So who's here? Myself and Tyler, as you just saw, are here, both the co-founders of Newman Rose Property Group. And below is the chat box where you can obviously pop any questions, queries, anything like that, and we'll try and get back to you as much as possible. We've got Tyler here with support, as well as Peter, a member of our team. So how's the bootcamp going to work? We're going to be going live at 7 p.m. every night for 60 to 90 minutes, and we'll do a Q&A at the end of each session, as well as in the Facebook group afterwards. So do pop your questions in the chat box. We are monitoring it, but I won't answer them until the end. The sessions will be recorded, but make sure you show up to the live streams to get the best experience throughout the bootcamp. Ask questions in the chat. As I mentioned, we are monitoring all the questions and we're going to do our best to get back to as many of you as possible, but negativity will not be tolerated and you will be blocked immediately. And make sure you have joined the Facebook group for bonus content such as live streams and further Q&As. And we will be making a special offer at the end of this bootcamp, giving you the option to enroll in further coaching and mentorship, although you're still going to learn plenty over the next 4 days. So who is this bootcamp for? First of all, it's for entrepreneurs. So anyone that considers themselves an entrepreneurial or is looking to get their first step into property development. Property investors, so anyone that's already a property investor that understands they need to get into bigger development deals in order to get to the next level. Or even existing developers, so existing developers looking to grow to the next level by developing their skill set, such as sourcing more profitable land, working with investors and building better teams.
So I think this is a good opportunity. We're interested to know if everyone can sort of chat, comment in the chat below, let us know sort of what your experience level is with property so far, just so we can get a good idea of who's here. That'd be great. And then there's a couple people commenting that the sound from the chat box keeps popping up, but there's an option just underneath. If you click the sound icon to mute the little notification noise that pops up on comments. So yeah, let's carry on.
I think there's a lag. So what are we going to cover? So day one today is going to be an introduction to property development and finding property development deals. Tomorrow is going to be designing, appraising and securing the deal. Day 3 is going to be financing deals and working with investors. And then day 4, our final day, is going to be piecing it all together and becoming a property developer. So very exciting, before we proceed, is the Ultimate Property Development Prize. So for one lucky person that attends the bootcamp, we're going to be giving away a 12-month access to our core coaching and mentorship program, Property Development Mastery, a 1-hour one-on-one business planning and coaching call with myself and Tyler, a VIP invite to our Inner Circle networking event being held in October, and the total value of this package is £10,000. So to find out how to enter the competition, stay tuned for the end of today's training. So can anyone do this? The property development process may sound simple once you understand it. However, this doesn't mean it's easy. Like building any successful business, property development requires serious hard work, determination, and you must be prepared to go all in. We're not here to sell you a dream, and this is certainly not get rich quick. If you want to be sold a dream and get rich quick, then please politely leave now. However, if you are ready to make this a reality, please comment in the chat that you are all in. So here's what's possible. First, we have Oliver and Chanel. So Oliver and Chanel were our first ever students actually of Property Development Mastery. They enrolled last year and secured a site that they're going to take through planning for 14 houses that they actually intend to build out themselves. The gross development value of the site is projected to be just over 5.5 million. So what gross development value means is the combined value of all of those units once sold on the open market. So combined, all 14 units have a value of just over £5.5 million. And with this particular deal, they've created equity by adding value in the planning stage, and they'll be utilising this to help get investors and bank funding to fund the project. So equity means sort of money that they've created in the deal by increasing the value of the land through the process of adding planning approval. We've got Harry. So Harry has recently acquired land in Wales to develop 23 houses. The gross development value of this site is just over 4 million with a 7-figure profit margin. And Harry is only 23 years old and is financing this whole deal with investors. So Harry is actually even younger than myself. We've got Peter and Ingrid, who I believe are on the call tonight. So hi, Peter. So they actually just collected the keys today to a hotel that they will convert into 27 apartments with space for another 12 apartments on the land at the rear. They're actually going to retain these units and operate it as a sort of serviced accommodation block. So for those of you that aren't familiar with serviced accommodation, it's sort of short-term rentals, more like your Airbnb type model. And this is going to generate a gross annual income of just over £750,000, which is amazing. And these are actually 2 of our students that have come together on a joint venture for this project, so that's really exciting. So what is property development? Property development refers to developing buildings or land into a greater use value. This is not to be confused with property investment, which typically refers to smaller investments like your buy-to-lets, single-scale units like sort of your house flips, HMOs, things like that. Development requires a different knowledge base to that of investment and a more specialised skill set, but the profits in return are significantly higher. So here's just a few examples of deals that I've worked on in the past. So Corley Gardens was a site for 17 units in Warwickshire, so in the Midlands. It was sort of high-end luxury detached homes, and the affordable units on this site, there was 5 of them, of the 17 were affordable, and they were rural affordable housing. The GDV, so that's the gross development value again, was just over 8.4 with profits of £3.2 million on this site. That's just an aerial photo of the road going in, the finished units there at the front, as well as sort of a overall site image. And actually you can see there where that digger is, the sort of site compound, that was where all the affordable units went, and those bungalows that you can see just behind the digger were 3 of the affordable units on that site. We've got the Oaks, and again this was actually also in Corley, so these 2 sites were a 45-second drive from each other. This was a smaller site for just 10 units, and it was a mix of high-end 4 and 5 bedroom detached homes, and there was no affordable on this site. The total GV was just over 6.2 million and profits just over the 2.8 million mark. Again, just some photos of the construction. So you can see there the strip foundations going in on the left, and the tiles and lath going on the properties on the right. And then just some finished photos just before the wear course went on the road, done by the agent at the time, which was actually Tyler. Mm-hmm. We have Albany Road. So this was one of our sort of larger sites. So this is a site that's currently under construction. The steel frame's just going up now, for 436 student beds in a affluent suburb of Coventry, which is called Earlsdon, which is known for students. The GDV of this particular site is just under £42 million, and the profit is just over £11.5 million. We've got Triumph Road in Nottingham, which is actually a combination of two sites. So the one that is highlighted on the left, which is Triumph House, but also sort of the land to the right and just up a bit is also included. So combined, these two sites are 552 student beds, and this is on the Jubilee Student Campus in Nottingham for the University of Nottingham. The GDV here is over £53 million, with profits on this one of 11.8 million. So importantly, who am I and why you should be listening to me? So here's me now. I'm in this exact seat now in our office in Leamington. But this is what it used to look like. This is actually my parents' house now, or what is their kitchen. On the scaffolding, don't let health and safety see these photos because they would not be too pleased.
So I've known Rosie personally for maybe 10 years at this point, and especially the last few years, she'd always tell me how she literally grew up on a building site, and she's been in development before she could remember. And I always thought she was exaggerating, and then literally it was last month or so we pulled out these photos. I was like, oh, you weren't joking that you actually grew up on a building site, and this is still the family home that
my parents live in now. Yeah. What's funny is for some reason I've got my trousers on backwards in that photo. I've just realised the pockets at the front. Obviously couldn't get dressed in the morning. This is actually, funny story, a Wendy house. I remember being younger and wanting one of those little wooden Wendy houses that all my friends had, and my dad, being my dad and a builder, saw it as an opportunity to get his tools out. So we now have a brick 2-storey Wendy house that has electricity and a fireplace. By the time it was finished, I didn't want a Wendy house anymore. So that sits there redundant. Again, building site, on the tools. That's actually my brother, digger driver. And this is where we lived, actually. So when I say we lived on the building site, this is where we lived. This was our setup, in the 2 caravans attached by a conservatory.
If Rosie really didn't want to put this one in, but I was adamant to really prove a point.
I don't think there's any excuse for why that climbing frame is just pure rust. We could have painted it, but here we are. There you go. There's me putting in the screed floor of the Wendy house. And then here's me at my dad's office, planning world domination, apparently. So yeah, who am I? Grown up in the family business of developers and bricklayers, so I've been immersed in property development from an early age. Learned more at the dinner table than most will have an entire career. So obviously my dad's a property developer and bricklayer. My brothers, I've got 3 brothers, 2 of them are bricklayers now. At the age of 18, I left school and joined Land Agency, where I spent 3 years sourcing and brokering off-market sites. So I secured over £22.5 million worth of sites in that time and generated just over £650,000 worth of commissions. But after 3 years, I decided to join the family business with the main focus on acquisitions and disposals. So during my time at Cassidy's, I acquired nearly £250,000 worth of GDV of deals. Most of this was in the purpose-built student accommodation sector, so like those 2 sites that I showed you earlier, Albany Road and Triumph House, as well as high-density apartments for the build-to-rent sector. But in sort of the back end of December 2020, I decided to leave the family business, and alongside Tyler, we started Newman Rose, and we are currently in the process of acquiring just over £65 million worth of development deals, which has just over £17.5 million worth of equity built into it. So that's where we are now. But alongside sort of the development journey, we've had our property education journey. So to date, in the last year, we've helped over 250 students start and scale their property development business. We have some of the best reviews and success stories in the property development education space. And very importantly, we have one product that helps people get one result. There's no fancy marketing, it's no upsells. It is just clean and simple what we do. And most importantly, above everything else, we are developers first and educators second. So we are doing the deals day in, day out alongside you guys. Here's just some examples of some of the work we've done in the press. So multiple stories there, mainly about the high density accommodation we did. So that's enough about backstory, who we are, what we do. Let's get started. So what is the development process? Firstly, you need to find and identify potential development opportunities. Once done that, you need to approach these opportunities and conduct your initial due diligence.
So what does that mean, if you want to sort of elaborate on that?
So your due diligence is just checking the initial viability of a site. So, is there any glaring potential issues that need to be mitigated, or something that could actually mean you can't even develop that site, for example? That could be a restriction on the title. Just to base
flood zone.
It could
flood zone.
Yeah, it could be a flood zone. Could be access issues. Could be a multitude of factors. But you just don't want to get too far down the line before doing these checks, only to realise that you can't do the site. You then will need to either design a scheme or review the existing scheme if the site already has planning permission. And if it doesn't have planning, that means there are no drawings on the site, so you will have to do an initial sort of schematic drawing yourself, just to basically understand, this piece of land, can it fit 5 units, 10 units, 20 units? Otherwise, you can't even begin valuing something without knowing what you can get on it. Which then leads us nicely into sort of step 4, which is to appraise the deal, make your offer, and enter your negotiations. So the appraisal process, I would say, just behind finding the actual right opportunity, or sort of hand in hand with it, is the most important part of the process, because if you get it wrong here, that trickles throughout the deal. Whereas being able to appraise the site, which basically means figuring out what is that land worth, being able to do that correctly is one of the most important fundamental skills. And off the back of that, of course, you'll make your offer to the landowner and negotiate the deal. Once you've got the deal, you're then going to be looking to raise finance from the investors and the banks, depending how you particularly fund that deal. And then you'll look to deliver that project with either a mains contractor or a subcontractor. So let's just have a look at the process for sites without planning permission and with planning permission. So for our sites without planning permission, you're first of all going to identify the opportunity. You're going to approach your opportunity. You're then going to secure the site with an option agreement, which actually brings us to our first exit strategy. So what I mean by an exit strategy is the way you can make money in your deal. And this is to assign your option agreement prior to planning. Essentially what you're going to do at this stage, if you chose this exit strategy, is you're going to charge a fee to another purchaser for finding that deal. So it's sort of like a deal sourcer, I guess. If you choose to proceed to the next steps, the sort of next stage is to achieve planning permission. Once you've achieved planning permission, you have another exit strategy available, which is a back-to-back, which is basically where you will sell the parcel of land on to a secondary purchaser for a higher amount than what you've paid for it. So your purchase contract might be for £300,000, but you may agree to sell it on to a secondary purchaser for £500,000 because you've increased the land value with the benefit of planning permission. But again, if you choose not to sell and you want to proceed to the building works, that's when you're going to purchase the site and commence the building work, which actually gives us 3 exit strategies. One is to build to sell. So this is sort of the most common exit strategy people know for development. So this is where you build them out and sell them, individually to homeowners. So this is the standard development model. There's also 2 other options: build, refinance, rent. So like Peter and Ingrid did in the example earlier, they retain that for their own property portfolios for the income. So rather than sell it, you keep it yourself. Or you sell it as a self-build. So this is sort of a toe-in-the-water approach to development, where you build only a certain element of the works out and sell the rest on for the ultimate purchaser to build out the house themselves. The next process is for sites with planning permission. So first of all, you secure a site with purchase contract. You'll do your standard conveyancing process. You'll then purchase a site with the planning obviously in place and commence building works. Now you'll notice there's not as many exit strategies with a site with planning. And this is simply because the margins aren't in it. You're going to be paying more for the land. So you don't have our strategies to exit on the contracts, and on the build exit strategies, we tend not to have the self-build model because again, the margins just tend not to quite allow it.
So I think if you just go back to the last slide, just keep it on the screen for people to really digest it. I think it's worth sort of talking through and applying maybe briefly right now what sort of strategies are best for certain people. So for example, obviously with the option agreement, like we discussed, if someone wants to maybe acquire and secure a potential development deal, but not necessarily want to get involved in the construction or build out with headache of doing that, or even going down the route of raising finance, that's an option for you to really become a specialist at finding deals, to then package and sell on to what we call a secondary purchaser or a secondary developer that's actually going to build it out.
Or if you do want to ultimately get into building, but your initial cash pot as it stands right now isn't huge, then this allows you both the sort of exit assign option agreement and the back-to-back give you the opportunity to build up that cash pot. But importantly, some people, although they like the process of development, they don't want the hassle of the building, or particularly the stress of raising the finance and having the debt around doing a build. So these are two great strategies. So this is ways you can profit from a development deal without actually having to put a spade in the ground, so to speak. So that's really valuable. And then sort of you find a lot of value, don't you, in the build, refinance, rent model, because
Yeah, well, you look at some of the biggest private equity firms and asset managers in the world, and that's what they do. They develop huge schemes and hold on to them and retain them for decades. To sweat the asset is the term they use quite a lot in that world. But there's lots of different options, and I think it's important to note that there's not just one way and one strategy to make money with development.
Cool. Right.
But if that's making sense for everyone so far, let us know in the chat. And of course, for those people who have just joined us and missed it earlier, if you've got any questions at any point throughout this, drop it in the chat. We've got myself here, Peter here, making a note of any questions, and then we'll allocate some time at the end to do Q&A and answer all of them as best we can. So fire away, Rosie.
Sure. Okay, so just quickly, obviously we've just gone through the two sort of journeys, I guess, for sites with and without planning. But let's just have a little look at that sort of in a bit more detail, the contrast between the two. So when finding and acquiring a site without planning permission, you have the ability to add value to the land, which helps create a bigger profit margin and therefore easier to arrange funding, attract investors, and use better contractors. So I always say to my students, just the fact that there is a higher profit figure in that deal isn't what's valuable about these sites without planning. It's the sort of ease of transaction that the margin brings. It's lovely, of course, to just have more profit in a deal, but the fact that these deals have much higher profit margins means that, and we'll look at this obviously in more detail on day 3 when we look at the funding, but essentially you kind of get more bang for your buck. So you can lend on the same terms, but those same terms give you more in return on a deal with these profit margins than sort of your standard ones where you buy a site with planning. So it means you've got to either put less money in yourself or you've got to find less money from investors. But additional to the fact that you actually have to use investors less because the banks do more on these deals, the investors actually are happy to work with them simply because they're not as risky. So actually I use the example of Harry, the 23-year-old with the 23 units in Wales. He's using private investors, and from the outset you think, oh, Harry's 23, he actually hasn't done a development deal himself. 23 units is a lot for a first-time developer, but it's because the margins are in that deal, and I know that deal, the numbers behind it, and the margin is really high. So basically the investors think, well, if it all goes wrong, we've just got an excellent deal to step into. So that's why it attracts the investors. And then beyond that, and again, I'll use the Harry example, he's going to use a mains contractor. What that means is one company is going to come in and handle the entire build process for him. So he can actually just sit back and enjoy it and learn from that process, because he's not having to do, the materials procurement, handling all the subcontractors. He just watches someone else do that. And he can only do that because the margin and the numbers allow for that slightly more expensive delivery method of a mains contractor. So it's all those benefits that come with these sites, not just the fact, there's more profit in it. But when buying a site with planning permission in place already, you do remove that planning risk and you are able to start works on site sooner. However, as I sort of mentioned, your profit margins tend to be lower, and you do also have less input in the design because someone else has already taken it through planning. So, planning risk, planning is never certain. You can never guarantee that you will get planning. So planning by nature has inherent risk attached to it. So naturally, if you do buy sites already with planning, you've eliminated that risk. Our personal preference is actually to find sites that are off market, that we can take through the planning process ourselves. And this sort of approach is mainly what we're actually going to be covering in our training over this evening, the next 3 days. So how do we actually find land? There are 5 main ways. There's plenty of ways, but these are the 5 key ones. So the obvious one is sort of your estate agents and land agents. You can also look at planning permission leads. Use your personal and professional network. So that could be people like architects, planning consultants, even sometimes things like accountants and solicitors have clients that have land opportunities. Driving around and word of mouth is a little bit more of an old school approach, and actually Harry's site was found through sort of word of mouth and cross between word of mouth and personal connection. And then most importantly, and the main focus we're going to look at today, is our mapping softwares. So this is where we use online softwares to identify potential opportunities. But like I say, there are plenty of other ways as well, but they're just sort of the 5 main key ways. So let's just have a look at these in a little bit more detail. So the sort of 3 main ones that you do come across are your agents, planning leads, and the off-market with mapping softwares, which is obviously our preferred route. So agents are going to be publicly advertised. So this is going to be the sites that you might find on Rightmove, for example. So the issue of this is there's going to be a lot more competition, and especially from those cash-rich developers or construction companies. And the issue with this is the cash-rich developers and the construction companies can squeeze the margins on sites in a way that you, as a non-cash-rich or non-construction company, can't, which means basically you tend to just get outbid, so you can do a lot of work on sites for sort of no return. Typically, these sites do already have planning in place, and most of the work has already been done, which, depending how you view that, is either a positive or negative, sort of in the way that we just discussed in the last previous slides. You've got highly motivated sellers, so ready to sell quick, so there's less lead-in times, but those margins are tighter, the expectations are higher, so they do tend to be harder to fund in the first instance, and then the build-out management tends to be a bit harder because those numbers are tighter. We've got our planning leads after this. So these typically are actually off market. So it's basically looking at the planning leads on the planning portals, finding things that have just got planning approval and approaching the landowners there. I would say these are sort of the warm leads. So within this bunch of leads, so to speak, you are going to have some sellers who are ultimately going to go on to list their site for sale with an agent, or were considering their options. They may have just got planning with a view of selling, and you're getting in early. So, you can get somewhat motivated sellers. They have taken the site through planning themselves, so obviously their price expectations are higher, but you don't have an agent in the middle who's bumping up that price even more. So high expectations, but maybe not quite at the same level as with an agent. But as I mentioned, you can be getting these sites off market direct to the landowner with little or no competition. And then finally, and most importantly, are off-market sites with mapping softwares. So these are off-market with little to no competition, and this is because these people you're just approaching out of the blue. There is no planning permission in place, and therefore the sort of expectations on the land value is lower. But normally you are approaching landowners who sort of have no idea that their land's got potential. So sometimes it can be quite slow to convert these leads. But, some people often say, well, why would they sell to you when they could just do it themselves? The reality is some landowners don't ever want to risk their money or time with the planning process, so they're happy to let you do it. So here's where most people go wrong in this journey. First of all, they look where all the competition is looking. So they look with the agents, they look even with planning leads, for example. They look for sites that already have planning permission in place, so those land owners' expectations are higher. And 3, they don't know how to accurately appraise land. So you may have heard of a third rule, and this doesn't work, or it very rarely works. So where do we think the magic really begins? So when you become skilled at sourcing profitable land and development opportunity, the magic really begins to happen. So first of all, you have profitable exit strategies available from day one. So these are the 2 exit strategies we mentioned earlier, which is the assign the option pre-planning or a back-to-back exit strategy. So this means you're never forced into building out. You've got options throughout your journey, which is a very nice position to be in. The sites have bigger margins, and so they're much easier to get the bank funding on. And when you do need to involve investors, it's much easier to find and attract these investors, like I mentioned earlier.
And this will be, sorry to interrupt, a bit of a recurring theme, because one of the most common questions we get, and it's something we're going to discuss on Workshop 3, is, well, where do you find investors? But importantly, the better question to ask is how do you get them to agree to work with you? And the fact is there are a lot of potential investors out there. There's a lot of people with a lot of cash in the bank. And the skill is not in finding them as much, it's getting them to agree to work with you. And when you really nail this from the front end, from the beginning, and like we're talking where the magic begins, when you can find the right opportunities by being a little bit more sophisticated and doing the things we're going to talk about, it becomes 10 times easier to get investors on board, which we've experienced, of course, in our own development business countless times. So, yeah, absolutely. Like I say, my students must get pretty bored of hearing me say that now, but it is, I can't stress it enough, the importance of getting that right deal day one for everything that comes afterwards. And then it's easier to manage the build out of these because you can afford a mains contractor and good professional teams around you. Which again, sorry to interrupt, is even more important now more than ever with bank funding at the minute, with the current sort of construction industry, the cost of the labour, raw materials. Banks are wanting, definitely they always have been more favoured. You're using mains contractors, but it's more prevalent now more than ever. So when you have a mains contractor on board, when you go to the banks to get the development finance, it's an easier conversation, and they'll look upon the deal more favourably as well. Yeah, and particularly, I'm sure, in the sort of audience, I guess you'll call it, today we've got a mix of people, but particularly anyone that's just starting out on their development journey or just wants to start out, experience is one of those things that banks do consider. And there's 2 risk profiles that the bank are going to look at, is the risk from a margins perspective, but also the risk from the construction perspective. Obviously the margins, you can answer that by bringing the right margin deal to them. But if you're new to construction and you want to be the one that manages the build via a subcontract route, that's going to make the bank uncomfortable because you have no experience doing that. If you can use a mains contractor, i.e. a construction company who builds development deals day in, day out, and they're going to handle the whole construction, you're basically de-risking the deal to the bank. So you then, as an inexperienced developer, can become fundable because you're de-risking it from both ends. So it's so invaluable. But most importantly, it makes it less stressful and more fun. You can afford to make mistakes. So there's so many moving parts within development, and you can do due diligence, you can run the numbers back and forward, front and back, as many times as possible, but there will always be probably something that just creeps out of the woodwork with a development deal. And if you've got a deal that is so tight on the numbers that any small slip up could make or break that deal, that year, 2 years it takes to build that project out will be the most uncomfortable and stressful experience of your life. And in my opinion, no amount of money should be worth that stress. Whereas if you've got a deal where, if something comes out of the woodwork that's going to cost you an extra £50,000, isn't nice, but the deal can absorb that cost comfortably and the bank will cover it,
it's not the end of the world. You know, it's more fun. You can enjoy the process, which, you know, really is what it should be about. So how do we do it? So first of all, we need to understand planning permission principles and, you know, what will and won't achieve planning fundamentally. We need to approach our landowners directly that you've identified on your mapping softwares. So we use Nimbus Maps, but there are a few mapping softwares out there. Once you get your responses, you're going to start designing and appraising a scheme to accurately calculate the land value. So figure out, you know, what is that parcel of land actually worth. And then you're going to systemize this process for maximum output and efficiency. Importantly, you're going to need to use the correct purchase contracts to secure the deal. So, you know, there's a lot around clever purchase contracts, and we'll talk about this later on in probably day what? We do it tomorrow. Tomorrow we're going to talk about purchase contracts because it isn't simply just a normal purchase contract that you use. So our mapping software. So I'm just going to quickly.
3x out of this.
Here you go. Here's Nimbus Maps. So this is what the mapping software looks like that we use. Like I said, there is other ones, but we use Nimbus Maps. Essentially, it overlays Google Maps in the first instance, but most importantly, I'm just going to do search here. And this actually is the Oaks, which is one of the developments I showed you earlier. But if you click it, it brings up this sort of info panel on the left. And as you can see, it's owned by Castile Rural Homes. But it gives you sort of a lot of information. Importantly, you can buy the register and lease schedule, which tells you who owns that parcel of land. So obviously in this instance, it is owned by a company, which is a piece of information that Nimbus pulls through for you. But let's just say I click onto one of the houses, which was obviously sold to, you know, private owners. You can see it doesn't tell you who owns it. It's a private owner. So you'd actually have to buy the register and lease schedule, which you can do on Nimbus Maps. It also tells you other bits of information. So when it comes to doing your site checks and due diligence later on, you'll do a lot of them simply with this info panel. So things like, is there a listed building? No, it's not listed. Is it in a flood zone? Not in a flood zone. Environmental factors. In this situation, the entire site sits in the green belt. So really good piece of software, as well as having things like workflows. You've got other sorts of overlaying tools. So you've got planning overlaying tools, bits about the market, so commercial availability, vacant buildings, average residential values. So yeah, overall just a really, really valuable piece of software. And this is exactly the software that we use in order to, you know, source for opportunities. If I actually go manage account documents, you can see here we have nearly 600 you know, titles that we've bought and approached, and that doesn't include the ones that were owned by a company, so we didn't have to buy the title. So it gives you an indication of obviously how many letters that we sometimes send out.
So essentially, in simple terms, the mapping softwares are pretty much Google Maps, but tailored for property development, with all the tools you need to see the boundaries of sites, and then, like Rosie said, there's loads of other tools. You can pull up the title register, you can do a lot of your site checks and due diligence to see if it is a viable opportunity as well. But yeah, that's it, and we'll jump back into Nimbus shortly. But before that, it's important to know what you're looking for, really, which is what we'll discuss now.
Yeah. So first of all, planning principles. So before I sort of go into them, essentially, the reason why we have these key planning principles is UK planning is decided in line with the NPPF, National Planning Policy Framework. Very interesting document, but the issue with it is there is no sort of objective measures which say this will or this won't get planning in it. So because of that, we've created, we actually have 10 key planning principles that we sort of work within. And normally if a site sort of meets some of these planning principles, it means it's likely to get planning. So let's just go through a few of those now. So sites falling into the built-up boundary will likely get planning approval subject to the scheme being sustainable. So the built-up boundary is basically the boundary of sort of a settlement. So, you know, if it falls within the boundary of a town, for example, that typically means it will get planning. Replacement dwellings, if there's something there, you can replace it. Quite a simple one. Brownfield sites will be supported for redevelopment. So a brownfield site is a site that's been previously developed for some sort of use. So it's normally some sort of commercial element on it, which can then be supported for redevelopment to residential. Properties with long gardens within built up areas will allow for properties to be built in the rear. And infill sites should look natural in setting. Now I will go through some examples and go on Nimbus Maps later on to sort of put a bit more context behind all of these, because probably at the minute you're thinking, what does any of this mean? And then alongside our 10 key planning principles, obviously I only gave you a few there, but we have 10. We also have 7, I call them types of sites. Now this isn't sort of an industry adopted type of site. It was just something.
This is the Rosie Cassidy.
Method. Yeah. So one thing I had when creating sort of the program was, if I look at a mapping software, I know what I'm looking for, but how do I articulate that in a way that people can then learn and apply themselves? I didn't know how. I just sort of grew up learning about it, so then I sort of just knew what I was doing, but it's how to articulate this, and that's where we came up with this 7 types of sites. Because normally if a site meets the criteria for one of these 7, and normally it will meet more than one type of site actually, it normally means it's good indication it could get planning. So we've got our built up boundary sites. So this is sites that fall within the built up boundary. Infill sites, this is where you're infilling a gap in a ribbon of development with with new builds. Backland, so this is where you're building behind an existing row of houses. Replacement dwellings, quite self-explanatory. Permitted development rights, so these are automatic approvals set out by the government basically to allow development. The most common one you will hear of is the change of use from offices to residential. Brownfield sites, so these are previously developed, typically like I say commercial sites, being redeveloped into residential. And then greenbelt sites. So greenbelt doesn't necessarily mean it's going to get planning. Greenbelt is something to be more aware of than anything. So is there anything you wanted to add before I go into explaining?
No, I think these visual examples are the best way to explain that. But I think if you really study these and people begin to see what determines whether a site has, and the key word is precedent, what has precedent to get planning. So once you understand these core principles, you can then use the mapping softwares more effectively, because I remember there's many times, I remember when I first started out, or even when I first started working as an estate agent, you'd speak to a lot of people that have this field in the middle of nowhere, and they think, oh yeah, I could maybe build 5 houses here, and then once you understand planning law and the principles we're discussing, you'd realise, well, actually,
not a chance.
Not a chance. There needs to be a reason and an argument and precedent, like I said, as to why I could get planning. So,
so I thought I'd just add some sort of approved and refused planning examples to, like I say, give you a bit more context to these. So this is what is a backland site. So this one was approved, and I don't have my mouse. I'd like my mouse.
There we go. If you keep it like that.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So with this one, the site is, as you can see, outlined in red, and then this was the proposed site plan. So in this situation, they were going to knock down this house, put a new property at the front, and then access to the rear to build these other 3 properties. With your backland sites, the key things is your access. So how can you basically get to the back, because they do tend to be somewhat landlocked. Obviously they mitigated that here by knocking the house down, but sometimes you are able to sort of sneak up the side, a bit like you can see with this development to the right. But also precedent is really important. So you can see here that the local authority has already established that backland development is acceptable, because you've got this exact situation happening just to the right of the site and also to the left here. So, to put this development in the back doesn't look by any means unnatural in its setting. So this was a very straightforward approval for this site. Let me click on to my next slide. And then a refused example. So from the outset, you wouldn't necessarily think there's a huge difference, but there's 2 key things going on here. One, there is no precedent for it. As you can see, all of these gardens are long. There is no current backland development. And importantly, it's understanding local context here. So what you maybe can't tell about these sort of squares on a page, I guess, is these sort of houses at the front and even the proposed ones are big. So this is in a big affluent sort of area. These houses are probably 3,500 square foot on average. And the proposal and part of the nature of these properties, the character in this area is big houses with big long gardens. And this is something that the council was very particular about protecting in what we call their local plan, which is sort of a more localised view of planning. So actually to approve this development by shortening these gardens went against that local plan. And whenever you do that, you're basically giving yourself an uphill battle. So although from the outset this may look like it should have been approved because it looks similar to our other one, the lack of precedent here was the key issue as to why it was ultimately refused. Here we've got an infill site. So infill, like I say, is basically infilling a gap sort of in a ribbon of development. So on the left is the site plan, on the right actually you can see the finished houses here. And what I think is so good about this picture is you can just see basically how natural it looks in the setting. It doesn't look unusual by any means to have these houses here, and if anything, if you can imagine, previous to these houses being built, it was just basically, I think this house's garden, that in itself probably looked a bit weirder than having the houses. So yeah, this is just overall really good example of infill, and straight away would have been approved, compared to an infill example here which was actually refused. Essentially, I don't know if you can sort of fully see, they were proposing just to the right of this house another property, sort of slicing it just down the title down the middle, and they're proposing sort of a new access just here to the right, with the existing one to the left. And overall, I mean, this was probably never going to get approved. One, it just looks cramped, it doesn't look right. Two, it's encroaching on sort of the view lines of this property here. It just doesn't look particularly natural to have a house extending that far forward. But most importantly, from what we call a highways perspective, it doesn't work because you've got a junction here, you've got a ingress to the one site here, you've got a new junction coming in here. Basically, there's a lot occurring in a small space that just makes that far too unsafe. You've got basically too many potential points where traffic could cross. So that one was refused. Built-up boundary approval. So this was simply the knocking down of a pub and replacement with dwellings. So again, as you can see, putting those houses on the ribbon here, it was completely natural. So that was approved.
Is that where you went?
That's my primary school. That is opposite my primary school. That's how I knew that site.
In Coventry, isn't it?
Yeah, that was my primary school.
Which you don't attend anymore.
I don't attend primary school anymore, just for clarity. And then a refused example was basically knocking down this existing house and putting, this is actually a block of 8 apartments, not just one big house, which isn't maybe completely clear. And the reason this one was refused, although overall it might look okay, you basically, if you can see here, the building takes up most of that plot, which again, the sort of context of this area is nice big plots with big houses on, but a lot of sort of space around the plots, that goes against it. And they're big detached family homes here, not apartments. So really it was just the context of the proposal wasn't right for the context of the location. So that's just, to sort of give you, I guess, like a live example of, a few approvals and refusals. So, any points, Tyler, before we just go on to Nimbus? And
I think let's pick one of those and use one of those as an example. I think maybe the simplest one is either the infill or built-up boundary. Maybe try and find an example of that and show us sort of Nimbus in action.
Cool. How do I? Yeah, escape. There we go. Okay, right. Let's zoom out. So just find an example of a site.
Or maybe even pull up that one in Coventry in Holbrooks we just used to sort of show the mapping software.
Okay, yeah, so we'll do that one in the first instance, which is up this end of Coventry. Testing my memory now. Penny Park Lane, here we go. Yeah, so there you go. That's that development actually built. So that
there we go. So
that used to be the pub, the Convoy primary school. So as you can see, yeah, that's a perfect example. Look how natural that looks. Compared to what was previously just a pub. They put however many houses on that particular site. So let's. I think I'll just, try and. Here's actually a site I know. Is that a good one to talk about?
Yeah.
Okay, so here would be an example of a built-up boundary site. So if I just go.
I know that one.
You know the one.
Yeah.
So if I just go search here, basically what you've got is this field owned by a private owner. Obviously, if you wanted to find out who owned it, you'd buy this register. This is actually, I call it Safeway. I think it's a Morrison's nowadays. Supermarket. So yeah, proposal here would be, potentially knock down this house or gain access through here. I actually talk about this particular site in a lot of detail in the course because some unusual features on it. So we'll probably move on from this one.
In fact, we'll use this example tomorrow when we talk about site checks.
Yeah, we'll save this one for tomorrow.
But if anyone can guess why, if there's any developers in here that can sort of guess why.
Oh yeah, go on then.
Maybe this is with sort of a little bit of a clue on the screen. It depends how much you guys can see. But if any of you more experienced property developers can understand why actually this wouldn't be a viable opportunity.
Yeah, let's leave it on there for a sec.
We'll see.
I'd be very impressed if anyone can figure it out from the screen. But yeah, good idea. We'll save that for tomorrow to run through. Okay, so let's look at finding a potential site. So how I tend to approach finding sites is I normally zoom in to about, too close, about this distance, maybe a bit further out, because I like to be able to see enough detail to sort of see the gardens and things like that. But I also like to see sort of the broader context of sort of what's going on. And straight away, Tyler actually just pointed on this one whilst I was talking. Here's an infill site, built-up boundary site. So basically, you've got houses all around it, and this parcel of land, that hasn't got houses on it. Sort of, to me, it sticks out like a sore thumb. It may not to you guys in the first instance, because that's part of obviously training your eye to know what you're looking for. This is actually owned by Citizen Housing Group, which is a housing association. So when we talk about our site checks and due diligence, I'll explain why maybe we won't actually approach this, but this would meet the criteria for a built-up boundary site. And you could probably fit, if you had a road coming in here, you could probably fit a pair of semis there, 1, 2, 3, 4. You could probably fit between 6 and 8 houses on this parcel of land, just sort of looking at it from the outset. And then obviously how quickly you sort of move around an area will depend on how good you are at finding sites. So here we've got what I can guess without clicking on it is going to be a pub with a beer garden. So that meets exactly, so that's going to be a built-up. This will be both a built-up boundary site and a brownfield site. But if you can picture that one which is opposite my primary school, imagine just replicating exactly that on this parcel of land here, knocking down this pub or converting the pub potentially to apartments and putting some new builds on this parcel of land here. Again, perfect example of a development site.
Another good example might be off Broad Lane, Broadmere Rise. I know there's a friend of mine developing there. Head towards Eastern Greenway. Here we go, just a bit further up. Behind, where is it? Here, Broadmere Rise. It's just
that bit there.
Yep.
Yeah, so there you go. If I click search here, there you go. Parcel of land being developed.
I think there's 6 or 7 units maybe
going on there. Yeah, looks about right. And then how about I just let's zoom out. Let's just go to somewhere completely random in the UK. Let's go to Norwich. I don't know why I've selected Norwich, but we're going to Norwich. So sort of an approach I take when it comes to looking at sites is I always like to sort of an easy win is sometimes your commercial buildings, and commercial buildings have a dead giveaway with their roofs. So you might be able to see what I'm looking at here. These with the sort of what look like a corrugated roof, and I guess somewhat maybe depends on your eyesight. That's a commercial building versus like our residential, sort of more of terracotta or roof tile type approach. So sometimes a really easy win is something like this. So as you can see, we've got what is predominantly a heavily residential area with just these few little sort of commercial buildings within it. So, an easy win there is, the knockdown, depending on the quality of the building, either the knockdown and the rebuild. So, you could potentially put like an apartment building on this site. Or if it's sort of maybe a nicer quality commercial building, sort of maybe like an old mill or something, you might do a conversion into sort of like loft style apartments or something like that. So that's an easy win, is just looking for your sort of sore thumb commercial sites in and about sort of existing residential. Okay, and then, maps jumping around all over the place.
I think if we find one more and we just sort of show what the next steps would be, so sort of once you've identified one, obviously we won't jump too far ahead, and so we've still got some bits just to discuss tomorrow around doing the site checks and viability assessments, but just showing, putting up the title register and then sort of what the next steps would be.
Yeah, okay, so there's a potential infill plot. Oh, too close. So you've got a potential infill plot here. Probably not. Got big trees now, got a bit closer to it. No, not going to use that as an example. Not good enough. It's always the case when you want a site, you'll struggle to find one straight away. You could put backland probably there, though we haven't got great precedent. That's a new build. Let me go over here. Yes, here we go, perfect. Okay, so here's going to be, couldn't have asked for a better one if I tried. So this here would make a great backland opportunity. So as you can see,
Click search, just to put there.
Yeah. So you've got already, precedent for houses in the back. You've got it the other side of the road as well. They've done it here. And all of this sort of street, basically, if you wanted to, you could do one large land assembly to create one sort of big development. But before even doing that, you've got this potential, which just on its own already has its own access up the side, already some massing there. Let's just say you took, sort of this sort of pair of semis and plonked it on there, you've got a site. So yeah, you'd buy the title register, find the owner, you'd then make your approaches. Mm-hmm. You could do your initial site checks. It's not listed, not in a flood zone, not in any sort of environmentally protected area, so it's good to go.
Well, that is a whistle-stop tour of this mapping software, because there's actually way more features, and we probably haven't done it much justice with the actual software, but just to give you an indication as to how it's used to initially identify a site, that was a really good example. So obviously, guys, we've got a Q&A coming up shortly where we're going to answer all of the questions. We've made a note of all the questions so far, but what we're going to run through now is sort of what the next steps look like in development, and then we'll also be announcing how you can enter the competition we discussed at the start.
Yeah. So yeah, obviously you'll spend a lot of time doing your searching for sites. We've just done a quick whistle-stop tour there. But once you find several sites, you're then going to conduct your site checks and due diligence, which, as Tyler mentioned, we'll show you how to do tomorrow. You're going to approach these landowners expressing your interest in their land, which is normally going to be in the form of a letter, and we'll show you sort of the letter that we send out. You're going to design a layout for the site and conduct a full financial appraisal. So this is going to be using a software called ProMap, and then we use our own appraisal sheet here, which again we'll show you tomorrow. We'll do that. And then making an offer, entering the negotiations, and securing the correct purchase contract. You're then going to be pursuing planning permission and arranging the finance. So as I mentioned earlier, these sites that we're talking about, with the mapping software and things like that, don't have planning permission in place as it stands. And then, of course, you're going to complete on the purchase and deliver sort of on your exit strategy, depending on what that exit strategy is. And and we're going to cover a lot of that over the next 3 days. Anything you want to add?
No, it's all good.
Cool. Right, competition. So,
well, let's just remind everyone what they have a chance at winning. So I know there's a few people who maybe joined a little bit late.
So for anyone that joined late, we're giving away to one person membership to our core training and mentorship program, Property Development Mastery, for 12 months. That will include the weekly Q&As with myself. They'll get a one-on-one session with myself for an hour, so a Zoom session where we'll go through sort of business planning and bits like that, and an invite to our VIP Inner Circle networking event being held at the end of October at our offices. Worth over £10,000 as well.
Yeah, depending on what value you put on that. But yeah, in order to win, do you want to explain?
Yeah, so in order to be in a chance of winning this, you need to join the Facebook group and look out for tonight's post asking you to share your light bulb moment with us. Comment below the post what your biggest takeaway of today's training was, and then a bonus entry for anyone that posts a photo of themselves doing today's workshop with the hashtag do the work. And we will be announcing the winner on workshop 4, so on Thursday we will announce who's won that. We'll just pick someone at random. But yeah.
So
tomorrow's agenda. So basically what we're going to be doing in tomorrow's session is how to perform all the site checks and due diligence required to determine whether or not a site is a viable opportunity, how to approach these landowners and express your interest, how to design an initial site plan and conduct a full financial appraisal to understand what the land is worth. Oh, that's it.
Yeah, and that's
it.
Be
a third one, fourth one.
For tomorrow, like we discussed at the start, day 3 is going to be all about finance, which is a huge topic. Specifically bank financing, how bank financing works. It's very different to sort of mortgages and bridging loans. So we're going to talk about development finance in detail. We're then going to talk how to structure deals with investors. So myself and Rosie in our development company, our developments we're purchasing, we work with investors on them. We've raised hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pounds of private investment from private investors. And so we're going to talk about how to not only attract those investors, how to find them, but like I discussed not too long ago, how to actually get them to agree to work with you and how to get them on board with a deal.
Financially compliant.
And compliance as well, because compliance is actually a huge part of raising money, especially when you're raising big sums of cash. You want to make sure you're doing it compliantly, and most people don't even know that there's regulation in place that exists. So myself and Rosie, we've spent a lot of money on compliance experts and coaches over the last 12 months, even ourselves, just to make sure we're doing everything the right side of the law and structuring everything in the best way possible. So that's going to be really exciting on day 3. And then day 4, we're just going to piece it all together. And like we discussed at the start, we're going to give you guys the option to enroll in further coaching and mentorship. And hopefully by that point, you guys will have learned enough and been so overwhelmed and feel like we've over-delivered with the value here that you'll be able to make a really educated and informed decision as to whether or not development is for you. And if it's for you, we're going to make you an exciting offer, give you the opportunity to get on board. So we're going to discuss all of that on workshop 4. So I think now is question time. So we've got some questions saved that we've noted down that people have asked over the last hour. So I'm going to read them out to Rosie, and then Rosie is going to fire across the answers. But if you have any more questions, guys, throw them in the chat. And we'll get... And
then just, obviously, as Tyler's mentioned, we've got a lot coming up over the next 3 days. So if I don't answer a question that's maybe about finance, because I'll save that. I may cover it in the teaching on what will be Wednesday, or I'll answer the questions about finance on the finance day. So,
So, the first question I've got here is Mike asked, how do you know how many affordable homes you need to put on a site? Which I guess we'll touch on tomorrow, but...
So each council is different and it will be in their local plan. So that's that localised view of planning that I mentioned earlier. So within the local plan, it will say basically, it will say a few things. One, at what point affordable housing is required in that authority. So some it's 10 sites are 10 houses, sometimes it's sites are 6, 15. So you'll know what is the affordable housing threshold is. And then once you hit that threshold, it will tell you at what percentage. So some authorities say they want 20% of houses over that threshold to be affordable. And I think there's some councils out there that are as high as 40%. And then some local plans will even go a step further, not all of them, some will then tell you of that percentage, what is the breakdown. So there's different tenures of affordable homes, and some local plans will even tell you the exact split. So you would look at that before doing an appraisal.
Yeah, and that threshold can be either what number of units or square foot?
It can be square foot, yeah. So some councils will say either developments of over sort of 10,000 square foot or 10 units, whichever comes first.
Yeah. Another question is, let me find them. Again, a really weird question from Mike as well. Is there a limit to what kind of size developments you would recommend for a complete novice if they were looking to go from purchasing the land to building out and selling?
Yeah, I would probably recommend not really going over, maybe if you wanted to build out, maybe not go over sort of 5 for a few key reasons. One is the banks. So the banks, they would like to see first-time developers start smaller. So unless you've got private investors, like Harry did, who's got the 23 units for his first site, that is with private investors who take a different view to banks. But if you want to fund with banks, yeah, I would stick a bit smaller. Just they'll see it as more manageable and sort of like, start small, build up. But also it means you potentially, well, you definitely won't have to deal with affordable housing and housing associations as detailed Section 106 agreements. But also you potentially won't have to deal with an adopted road, and the adoption process for a road and the construction of an adopted road can be a lot more technical than a private drive. So for those reasons, a combination of those reasons, I would recommend maybe just starting at about 5 units.
And I think there's a flip side to that argument as well, is that if you actually build out too small of a site sometimes, whether it's 1 unit or 2 units, it's almost like if you're going to go to the extent of going through the planning process, arranging finance, you may as well do it on a site where there's a little bit of scale to it, especially when there's sort of some fixed costs as well.
Yeah, and the biggest thing with maybe sites like 1, 2 units is, landowners have very few landowners sell their land for sort of less than £100,000 nowadays. So, you want to make that uplift in the planning, but sometimes on sites with maybe 1 or 2 units, unless you're in very affluent areas, sometimes it's just so difficult by the time you get to a figure that a landowner will accept to get that uplift in value that we're looking for. So really a good sweet spot is probably that like 3 to 5 units. No, maybe 3 to like 7 units for first time developers.
The next question we had from Niraj, a great question, is will £100,000 be enough to get into property development? And Niraj is an experienced buy-to-let landlord.
Yeah, definitely. Sort of 2 reasons there. You've got some experience in property already, so banks do like that. And yeah, £100,000 could it would be a smaller development. I'm trying to think.
But you could also obviously pool your resources with other investors. So if you're looking to just use your £100,000 plus bank financing, there's going to be a limit on the size of deal you do. But when you're putting skin in the game yourself, when you're putting your money in as well, again, it's actually easier to sort of get investors to agree to work with you because they see that you've got what the term that's used is hurt money. Banks, investors, they want to see that if something was to go wrong, you've got some skin in the game, which is completely understandable. Yeah, so one of our deals, for example, that we're just
about to complete on.
It feels like we've been just about to complete on it for a few weeks now, but it's funny, the finance is sort of dragged on, but we're putting a 6-figure amount of our own cash into that, but also multiple 6 figures from investors, and the investors are happy that we're putting cash in, so they're a little bit more comfortable because we've got something to lose as well, and the banks as well. So
but combined, that deal total cost is like what, 4.5
million across.
4.5 from that sort of equity input from ourselves. So, combining the types of lending with your own capital at £100,000 could give you access to a lot more than you think.
Yeah, so this leads on to sort of the next question we had from Joseph, which is how much capital is required to get started in property, which I guess is something we'll talk about maybe on workshop 4, but I guess it's how long is a piece of string, really. It sort of depends on so many different things. It depends on the strategy, but what would you say?
Yeah, so obviously if you've got very little capital, then maybe trying to go 0 to 100, i.e. nothing to building out, is probably I don't know what quite the word is, adventurous, isn't it? Optimistic, maybe is the right word. But my recommendation, if you didn't have a massive cash pot, would be to build up that cash pot with sort of your assignable options and back-to-back exit strategies. So no, you wouldn't be able to build out straight away. You'd have to sort of lay the foundations with other exit strategies first. But a few things about that. One, I'm
just going to put our cameras on.
Oh, we're not. One is that you're going to be solidifying that understanding of sourcing sites by doing your deal sourcing prior to building out. So you're going to get better and better at finding the right sites. And I forgot what I was saying now, kind of thing. Find sites.
Well, obviously, how much capital?
Build up your cash pot and build up your experience as well. Make the mistakes on those first sites that you're not building all the way out. So, yes, you don't get to start building out straight away, but you are gaining a lot of experience, building up your cash pot. And, I always say property development isn't something that happens overnight. If you want to get into this, you're getting into it for the long run. So, maybe a year, 18 months in the short term to build up that cash pot and experience. It's a drop in the ocean in the bigger picture, so to speak.
Yeah. Next question we had was, you like this question, it's a question we get asked a lot, is what is the 3-3-3 rule, or sometimes referred to a third rule, which is just some urban myth that is... a lot of people seem to know about this rule and it seems to make some development.
When I was an agent, honestly, if I had £1 for every time I heard this, I would have retired. I would never have got into development. Basically, it's the concept that a piece of land is worth a third of the GDV, so that gross development value should be broken down to 1/3 land value, 1/3 cost, 1/3 developer profit.
Which is never
it's
the
just
case.
Never, your profit, aside from anything, your costs are very rarely going to be 1/3. They'll be higher than that. The only time this really works, so it's not because the rule works, it's just a fluke, is basically on like sites of like 1 or 2 units where your infrastructure costs are very low. So overall your costs become a lot lower. So that can work. But yeah, the third rule, I think it got made up in a pub somewhere and passed around the country apparently. But yeah, it doesn't work.
We'll discuss that tomorrow when we talk about running financial appraisals and how you actually calculate what a land is worth and working backwards. Mike asked, really good question, is there still a profit to be made from sites you could buy from Rightmove? Yeah, of course.
Yeah, if you can buy them at the right price. We at the start of the year looked at buying a few sites with planning. And sometimes you can't even make them. I don't understand where they get the asking prices from, because doing an appraisal, you have to, again, we'll talk about this in more detail on tomorrow, Wednesday, when we talk about the funding, but banks require a certain minimum profit margin, and as long as you can meet that, then yes, that means there is a profit margin of normally about 22%. So there is profit, but you just have to build it out in order to actualise that profit. Rather than your sites that you buy, that you get without planning, and you get the planning, there's profit in the land and in the construction. So yeah, there is still profit.
I think the biggest thing I've noticed from when you look at sites that are on the open market, and this goes even on the lower end of the spectrum, buying single unit properties, not just land, but more so with development, you are competing with construction companies. There are construction companies that will want to buy it and build it out themselves, and because they've got the competitive advantage that they can save money on the construction, therefore they can afford to pay a little bit more, so you're competing with those. Where if you're a developer looking to get a contractor in place and they've got that make their contractors profit, you can't pay as much. And then also cash buyers and we'll look at appraisals tomorrow. The cost of finance, the cost of borrowing can be in the hundreds of thousands. So when you're competing with cash buyers, again, they can pay hundreds of thousands of pounds more than you. So, which is why when we like to, that's just really why we sort of suggested in this training today that buying stuff off market, finding stuff off market, when you're a little bit more sophisticated, you can take it through planning. You don't have to compete with that. Ryan asked, why are you doing this / educating us if your business model works? It's a great question. There's many different answers to this, and I'm sure myself and Rosie both have different answers. One, there is an abundance of opportunity for everyone to succeed with property development. We asked, why are you training all your competitors? Well, first of all, even myself and Rosie, we have enough deals in our pipeline now to last us for the next 3, 4, 5 years. Yeah. So we're not really actively looking for too many opportunities. Secondly, I think it's only 6 or 9% of the UK is built on, which means there's still a lot of land to be developed. And if you look at, I don't know what the numbers are recently, but I can without a doubt say that we are well behind what the government wants us to build. If you look at what the government wants in terms of the number of houses they want built, and that gap grows year on year. It's sort of like compounding the difference. But do you want to go explain on that a bit more, why we created this business? And it's a cash flow business as well. So, when you understand, if you read any book if you read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, for example, the most common book people read, it will talk about the difference between building income and building wealth. And you can have income streams for sort of cash flow, and then you obviously have the vehicles that build wealth. For us, development is a wealth building vehicle, as it should be. And there are significant profits we made, but it's also, like we said, it's slow money. You can take a site, you acquire a site, take it through planning, build it out. It could be 18, 24 months before you realize your profit. And one of the biggest things a lot of developers struggle with is cash flow. And so why we teach, and we'll discuss it tomorrow when we run appraisals, that it's important to build in a project management fee into your deal, so you are getting sort of an income and a cash flow while you're doing the developments, and you're not struggling to make ends meet every month. But also,
one thing I want to say is, both Tyler and I have quite aggressive plans in terms of the growth of this business, and without what we call our cash flow business, which is the education business, we would start struggling to fund the planning applications. I mean, some of the planning fees we're going to be paying over the next 12 months on some of the sites, exceed probably £250,000, and if we didn't have something to pay for that, we wouldn't be able to grow the business as quick as we want to. And we both, when we sat down and knew we wanted to sort of do this, we knew we had to fund it somehow, and that was exactly that. But then aside from that, I've taught for a long time. I say a long time. I started teaching on a one-to-one basis probably 2 years before starting the course, and I just really love doing it. Tyler always laughs at me. I geek out about this sort of stuff. There's the HS2 construction's going on near us, and they're doing all the groundworks now. And every time I drive past it, I'm like, wow, that's so impressive. Like, I geek out over this sort of stuff, and seeing people passionate about it as well, I find really exciting. So I just find it fun seeing people get, like talking to Harry the other day about his results and that site. I can't wait to go out and visit that and see it, because I don't know, I like it.
So we'll wrap it up in the next maybe 4 or 5 questions, guys. So I want to make sure we're answering sort of questions that are specific to today's training as well. And obviously tomorrow we're going to cover a lot. Some good questions we had. 2 similar questions. So one from Gabe: what was the biggest help you had starting in property overall? James also asked, what's the best advice you've received regarding property? So similar question. And so I would probably, I'll let you answer as well, but I'd say probably the best thing I ever did was sort of invest in mentorship, and just so very early on when I started my property journey when I was 17, 18, obviously we've not discussed my journey so far, I just wanted to identify people that were well, especially in the property space, 20, 30, 40 years ahead of me, as a lot of property educators were much older, and I wanted to sort of compress time by acquiring their knowledge and their skill sets, and so yeah, that's the best help I've ever had, and we still do it like we alluded to earlier to this day. We hire, Rosie and I hire consultants and coaches in certain aspects of the business that we really want to dial in on. Compliance was a big one for us earlier this year. But yeah, what would you say is the best, other than living on a building site?
On it? Probably, actually sort of linking back, I guess, to the previous question, my dad always said you've got to have a cog. So I remember working when I was a land agent. I remember at the time not particularly enjoying it towards the end, and I used to cry like every day because I hated my job so much. I think you remember. I remember calling my dad in tears and him just being like, Rosie, you need a cog income that allows you to not think about paying the bills, to then have the mental capacity and time to think about and finding, the development deal that makes £1 million or something, because otherwise how do you fund it, how do you do it, and things like that. So that's where my dad taught me the cog, which is where the idea for the education business came from, but also just sort of perseverance. I always joke my dad has this what do you call it, like a storage unit of files, a filing cabinet, that's the word. It's been a long day, full of land registries printed out manually. There's got to be thousands in there that have been approached, and it's just that understanding you're not going to send one letter and get the £1 million site, the £10 million site. It's that having, the constantly it's a numbers game, and teaching that and sort of instilling that into me, I think sets you up well for the development journey.
Yeah, I just want to take a moment to remind everyone to join the Facebook group. We're going to do a bonus Q&A in the Facebook group tomorrow as well.
Yes.
Just to make sure we can get everyone's questions answered. I'm going to post a link to the Facebook group in the chat just now, so keep a lookout for that, and also the competition as well. So we're going to put a post as soon as we wrap up this live stream asking you to share your light bulb moment if you want to take part in the competition. The instructions are on that Facebook post, so go comment over there, share your light bulb moment, and obviously on day 4, the workshop 4, we're going to announce who the winner is. So let's see what the next questions are. So this is a really common question, is can you do this, can you get into property development while having a 9-to-5 job?
Do you want me to? Do you want me to?
Yeah.
So what I would say is, particularly if your focus is on finding sites without planning, in the first instance you can do that in tandem with a normal job. Obviously you've got to do it in the evening, so you'd still be working in the evenings, but yeah, you can do it alongside because it doesn't require constant day-to-day monitoring, and you could choose to just deal source alongside your normal job permanently. But then at some point, if you want, you could then choose, once you've got your cash pot, or it might be as and when you start the construction of your first project and you have the project management fees coming in, it might be then that you choose to leave your main job. But you can definitely do sort of the deal sourcing and the back-to-back strategy alongside a normal job. Building out alongside a normal job would become a bit more difficult. You definitely couldn't do it if you were subcontracting, because you'd work around the clock. With a mains contractor, in theory you could. Whether or not you'd want to is probably the bigger question there. But in theory you could with a mains contractor, but I probably wouldn't recommend it. I'd recommend just, that if you're going to be building out with a mains contractor, you're building something with some substance. So at that point you're a developer. So just leave the day job and become a developer.
or another, it depends if if you really love your job and depending on your financial situation, you can joint venture with other people. So there's, I'm aware of plenty of investors that work in a business, they work in a job, but they've got some cash and they've then partnered with someone that's actually going to do the day-to-day sort of construction and everything. So it's all about bringing equal value to the table. A couple of people asking us to reiterate the criteria for the competition. So if you join the Facebook group and as soon as we finish this live stream, there's going to be a post in there asking you to sort of share your light bulb moment. The more engagement we see from you guys, the better, and all the instructions will be on that post. Christian asks, what if a backland site goes across multiple landowners? And he also asked, are brownfield sites more likely to support argument block planning applications? So 2 questions there.
So if it goes across multiple landowners, that's what we call sort of a land assembly, and we do talk about this in the programme because there is a particular way of approaching that to not sort of trip yourself up. But yeah, basically you would just, rather than have a deal with one landowner, you would have multiple deals on the go, basically, to tie up what will be one site, but the planning will be across all the sites. But yeah, you'll just have multiple purchase contracts basically with the different landowners, and it's normally called like a land assembly is what most people in the industry will call that. And then brownfield. Yeah, so within the National Planning Policy framework, there is just a stipulation that when it comes to development and the priority order, there should be a priority given to previously developed sites rather than building on non-previously developed sites, because obviously that land is already degraded by nature by being a brownfield site. So yes, the fact it's brownfield will support the planning application, which is basically the fundamental of why those sites get planning.
Some other questions. Wasn't a name, it's just guessed, but do you ever buy sites at auction? So we don't, and I guess that to us comes under the umbrella of buying through an agent. Personally, I've never liked auctions. I've attended many property auctions, and for the same sort of reasons we discussed, we talked about buying through agents, is that you're then competing with other people. It's on the open market, and the way someone framed it to me once, which really stuck to me, if you're in a property auction, a room full of 100, 200 or however many people, and there's however many people bidding on a specific lot and building on a piece of land, the person that wins that auction is essentially been willing to pay more than anybody else. And so in my mind, that doesn't necessarily mean have they won, or have they, because they've just
the winner is a seller at an auction.
Yeah, the winner is the person that sells it. Is the winner really the person that pays more than everybody else in the room? Now, sometimes that person may, again, have a competitive advantage. They might be able to do everything cash. They might have their own construction companies, so they can pay more. They may know something that other people don't. They may be getting a little bit more creative with the designs, or they've spotted something. But a lot of the time, especially in today's current market, you go to a lot of auctions and they're going for, I would say, crazy money.
The horror stories, if you would, that I've heard of people, really getting themselves into sticky situations with development and with banks, is normally driven by the fact they've done something like purchased it at an auction and basically just paid too much. And like I say, it's similar to agents, but what's worse about an auction is the emotional factor, that people, end up getting caught up in the bidding and be, I'll just pay another 5, another 10, another 15,000, and that's I wouldn't even entertain going to an auction myself.
And I just want to use that point to drive home the key message we're trying to get across in this training. If you want to be a sophisticated property developer and do the sites with the bigger margins that are more fun, you achieve that by becoming a bit more specialist in the skill set of sourcing land, by understanding planning law, planning principles, how to identify off-market sites where there's little competition. And the perfect example is the case study we mentioned at the start is Harry Medhurst, and if you check out Rosie's YouTube channel, the full 40-minute interview is there. He, on a 4 million GDV site, has got a 7-figure profit, and that's because he identified the land off-market, he was direct with the landowner, and he negotiated a good price. That's allowed him to get a mains contractor, it's allowed him to get some investors on board, and that's a perfect example. But if he went down the road to an auction, tried to find a site, he's going to be very limited. It's going to be harder to get a mains contractor, and it's going to be harder to get investors on board.
Yeah, absolutely. I just noticed on that topic, someone said, what is the difference between a mains contractor and a normal subcontractor? That was from Baz. So a mains contractor is basically a building company who will, normally, and we teach with a design and build contract, it's called, they will do the entire build process. So they will order the materials, they'll get the subcontractors in, they manage it day by day. You basically turn up maybe once a week and check the progress and the quality. So you basically package off the entire build to someone else who then will do the packages within it. A normal or a subcontract approach is where you're the project manager, you will have to do the tender, and appoint the individual contracts, i.e. the brickwork contract, the groundwork contract, the roofing contract, carpentry, each individual one. And then where those contracts aren't a supply and fit, you will have to order all the materials, so you'll have to do the procurement and the order scheduling. So that means you are day to day managing that site in every way, including things like the site security, the welfare units on site, the site managers, all of that all comes under you as a subcontractor.
Okay, I think just because of the time, we're going to wrap it up there, guys. So apologies to anyone whose questions we haven't been able to answer, but we're going to do a live Q&A session in the Facebook group tomorrow. So I'm going to post the link in the chat again now. So join the Facebook group tomorrow. We're going to go over how to appraise a site, so how to figure out what that land is worth. How to sort of design a scheme, sort of design principles around, okay, well, you've identified a parcel of land, well, what exactly can you get on that? I'm going to look at how to do the site checks and due diligence. So you identify a parcel of land like we've been through on Nimbus. Well, that doesn't 100% mean it's a viable thing. There's a lot of things you've got to check as well first.
Yeah.
So yeah, join the Facebook group, show up tomorrow.
What time we'll do a Q&A? Do you want to give a time?
We'll post it in the Facebook group tomorrow morning.
Yeah, I'll have a look at my diary
tonight.
and let you guys know what time.
And yeah, if you guys are serious about this and you're serious about property development, make sure you show up every single evening for the next 4 days. Today was pretty packed with value, but it's only going to get more and more. So
yeah, the next few days get a lot more intense.
Yeah, but thanks for showing up.
Yeah.
And yeah, looking forward to connecting with all of you guys over the next few days. So have a lovely evening, and we'll see you on the Facebook group.
Yeah, we'll see you tomorrow.
Cool. All right.